evening. You're watching Gravitas. Former Indian naval officer Kulbhushan Jadhav, abducted by Pakistani authorities last year, has been sentenced to death by a military court. There is no evidence of a proper trial. We do not know if hearings took place at all. What we do know is that there wasn't enough proof against him. Barely a month back, Sartaj Aziz, the Pakistani Prime Minister's advisor on foreign affairs, publicly admitted that there wasn't conclusive evidence against Jadhav. India says that he is a civilian, unfairly targeted. Pakistan says he acted as a spy, fomenting trouble in Balochistan. Whichever side you believe, what is undeniable is the fact that the Pakistani military sentenced a foreign national without giving him consular access in complete violation of international law. First Sarabjit, now Kulbhushan. On Gravitas tonight we ask, will Islamabad once again get away with what is being called murder, and is Pakistani military accountable to no one? And Palki Sharma Upadhyay, the headlines this Monday. Modi takes Turnbull for a ride. The Prime Ministers of India and Australia visit the Akshardham Temple and ride the Delhi Metro after signing 6 MOUs. No forward movement on trade talks. G7 gangs up against Russia in Lucca. A day before, US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson heads to Moscow. The group of 7 meets in Italy to firm up the West's response to Putin on Syria. The US flexes its muscle in the Korean Peninsula, sends a naval strike group to browbeat Pyongyang to shut down its weapons program. China's top nuclear envoy is in Seoul to discuss the North Korean threat. Three months of emergency in Egypt, a day after twin attacks on churches leave dozens dead. The LCC government put security forces on alert, fearing more attacks. About 6 hours back, an Indian civilian, Kulbhushan Jadhav, was illegally, in fact, sentenced to death in a sham trial by a Pakistani military court. He was kidnapped by Pakistan's agents from Iran in October 2016, and in just 6 months, Pakistani courts found him to be guilty of espionage.
My wife will put back. Thank you.
The facts as they stand at this moment are these. 1. Kulbhushan Jadhav is an Indian citizen, and the Indian government has repeatedly submitted proof to show that he was not connected to any government agency when he was kidnapped by Pakistani officials. Fact number 2, despite being a civilian, Pakistan regularly denied India access to Jadhav. 3, the military trial was a sham where Jadhav's defense was not adequately prepared. And to add to that, even senior advisor to Pakistan's Prime Minister Sartaj Aziz has accepted repeatedly that there was little evidence to claim that Jadhav was a spy. And joining us this evening on Gravitas, Smriti Singh, Senior Media Officer, Amnesty International, with me in the studio. Also, G. Parthasarthi, former ambassador to Pakistan. Good evening to both of you. We also have Reema Omar. She's an activist and legal advisor to the International Commission of Jurists. Good to have you on the show, Reema. G. Parthasarthi, let me ask you first. What do you make of this trial? We do not know when the proceedings took place.
I think you should understand the context in Pakistan. There has been a tussle between the military and the civilian government. And finally, the civilian government has yielded and granted the military, through courts martial, to not just deal with persons from outside or terrorists, but to deal with Pakistani nationals. This was a very contentious legislation, fought very hardly in the Pakistan Assembly. Large number of parties objected, but finally yielded to pressure from the army. Now, this is an army court following army procedures. It does not respect the Vienna Convention on International Relations, under which Kulbhushan Jadhav was entitled to meet with Indian diplomats for given consular access, and to a consul which could to defend him, who could be fixed in consultation with us. So this is the army asserting itself. They have sentenced, you'll be surprised, 16 to 18 people to death. Pakistanis recently.
Are you saying this has got nothing to do with India?
No. That is the domestic factor. This is the India factor. The common factor is the military, even dispensing justice which even the President of Pakistan or the Supreme Court cannot call into question. So they've been given sweeping judicial powers. It's been controversial within Pakistan. And the processes of natural justice which go in. Look, during my time as High Commissioner, there have been cases where Indians have been held for espionage. We have held their guys for espionage. Proper trials took place, appeal process was there, consular access was given. And then there was either a trade-off, the matter was dealt with. Nothing of that has been observed in this case. It is for that reason that no less than the Foreign Affairs Advisor of Nawaz Sharif, who's the de facto foreign minister, acknowledged in Pakistan's parliament there was no evidence. So that is the reality. That's a situation you're going to have to deal with, and we will deal with.
So given what he's just said, and we've also been saying that the Pakistani government itself admitted that there isn't enough proof, don't Kulbhushan Jadhav's family and his country have the right to at least know what is the proof against him? Why has he been sentenced to death?
See, there are a lot of things that we have to see. The first one is that the Pakistani military courts are an inherently abusive system. Now, why I say that is because, like Sir rightly said, that there was no access to the counsellor, which is a right which is given under the Article 14 of ICCPR, where the accused a defendant has the right. What Pakistani military courts are doing, they are stripping defendants of their human rights. What we believe is that the criminal jurisdiction of Pakistani military courts, or for that matter anywhere in the world, should only extend to trials or for breach of military discipline, subordination, and it should not extend to any other crime. So, which happened in this case.
Right. Reema Singh, Reema Umar, in fact, I want to ask you this. Do you believe that this trial was free and fair then, given all these facts that we have?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. Just a couple of quick points on jurisdiction. So I think it's a bit confusing, and media reporting on this case has also been very confusing. There is now a constitutional amendment in place in Pakistan, and this was introduced actually in 2015, which allows military courts to try certain terrorism suspects. But even before that, Pakistani military courts, unlike military courts in India, have had jurisdiction over civilians in a very limited number of cases. And one set of those cases is the Official Secrets Act. And Jadhav's, as far as I know, has been tried under that provision. So he has not been tried for terrorism. He's been tried for espionage and spying under the Pakistan Official Secrets Act, which military courts have the jurisdiction to also, with the civilian courts, they too have jurisdictions to hear those cases. So that is the jurisdiction under which the military claims to have tried him. The problem, as the person before me also pointed out, they're not just specific to this case. They're generally applicable to all cases where the military tries people who are civilians. Military courts should only have jurisdiction to try people who are from the military, and specifically for military-related offences. And this I say for a number of reasons. The first is that the military is part of the executive of the state, and the most fundamental part of a fair trial is that the judiciary or the trial court has to be independent. Now, how can a part of the executive be independent? It is still, subject to the same military command, etc. So that is the first issue. The second is that Pakistani military courts do not recognize the right to appeal before a civilian court, which again raises a whole bunch of issues, including whether the right to an effective appeal is provided or not. The people who are convicted, they may appeal to a military court of appeal, but not to a civilian court, which is a big problem, including for the reason that if the Chief of Army Staff confirms a sentence, as has happened in this case, how can junior officers then later, overturn it? It just does not seem possible, which is a problem. Then, of course, we have problems of whether a detailed judgment with reasoning, with evidence, is provided or not. And in this case, we've only seen a statement by the ISPR, which by no means fulfills those requirements that international standards require, that people should be given reasons for their convictions, including the evidence, the facts of the trial, and the reasoning. So these are just some of the issues why trials by military courts, not specific to this case, but generally in Pakistan, do not meet fair trial standards.
Right. Taha Siddiqui, WION's Islamabad bureau chief, is also joining us. Taha, there are many conflicting reports on what really happened. What are your sources telling you? What kind of proof was there against Kulbhushan Jadhav for him to be sentenced to death?
Well, the proof or any evidence of that matter hasn't been shared with the media. There are very conflicting reports as far as when we talk to different sources in the military in Balochistan. Of course, they have the same version that we keep hearing from the Pakistani media, and the version that we've seen that the military has narrated first when the arrest happened, and then afterwards when the DGISPR, the previous DGISPR, he conducted a press conference where he released a confessional statement, a video which was heavily edited video in which we can see Kulbhushan Jadhav confessing to his crimes, and then this press statement from the ISPR today. But when we talk to the civilian intelligence agencies, they are very skeptical about the whole process. Some of the sources in Balochistan that I spoke to talk about the fact that the circumstances under which this individual was found and the area where this individual was found, it was impossible for a foreigner to penetrate and to be possibly present over there. So there are definitely questions about his presence in the particular area. He has been, even from civilian intelligence sources that I've spoken to. So those questions remain, and when it comes to military affairs, the military isn't usually forthcoming. We're just seeing a press statement from them coming out, and then the Foreign Office or other officials in the civilian government just sort of repeating what the military has already said.
Right. And Mr. Parthasarathy, there's a certain degree of brazenness. We saw last month 2 Indian clerics went missing, and then they mysteriously resurfaced, and they said we'd strayed into a no-network zone, so we couldn't get in touch with anyone. Now the military comes and overrides the government, as you're saying, declares that this is a death sentence. Some reports saying that the government also found out after reports came in the news media. We saw what happened with Sarabjit Singh. This military is not accountable to anyone, not in the country, not outside.
Just if I may narrate to you and your audience a personal experience.
Sure.
When I was serving in Karachi in the 80s, I knew a very eminent jurist and judge of the Supreme Court called Justice Fakhruddin Ibrahim. He was one dissenting judge in the Bhutto trial. And Justice Ibrahim told me the entire evidence against Bhutto, which led to his being hanged, was fabricated, that the army had done it, and the judiciary fell in line. So the military in Pakistan, as the young lady who spoke earlier said, is a separate instrument of state. It regards itself as separate, equal to and different, or even higher than the other instruments of state, whether it is government or judiciary. So, and you have the army here running scared, the politicians running scared, and actually enacting a constitutional amendment amidst much furor recently to give the army these powers. And they'll pay for it, because this is an army which has tasted power, which wields power without constitutional responsibility, and pretty much will do what it wants. But here, by not granting access, it has violated international law. It has violated the Geneva Conventions on International Relations and consular access.
So then why does the world stand as a mute witness to what happens repeatedly in Pakistan?
Oh, well, Amnesty International has spoken against the system of military courts in Pakistan, and as the speakers have rightly pointed out, that for a fair justice system, there are three things which are very important. One is the court to be competent. The second one is to be impartial and then independent. But in this case, competency is questioned because the military courts are run by the military officers who are subordinate to the chain of command. They don't have any formal legal training because they are soldiers. So the question is competency. Second is, like I said, independent judiciary. In military courts, there is a chain of command. The subordinate officers report to the higher chain of command of military officers. And to be impartial, you need to give all these things like evidence, counselor access, what are the charges that the person has been booked in. All these things should be made public, which hasn't been made in this case. And Amnesty International has vociferously always condemned this kind of trial system, and we do demand fair trial.
Right. I'm sure Kulbhushan Jadhav's family does appreciate gestures like these, but more needs to be done at this point. Of course, his life is at stake. And you were talking about spy exchange programs, if that's the right term for it. For the record, 46 Pakistani nationals have been arrested on charges of espionage in India in just the past 3 years, and their trial is still underway as we speak. In Pakistan, on the other hand, the trials of those accused of carrying out the 26/11 attacks in 2008 continue to remain in limbo. Jamaat-ud-Dawa chief Hafiz Saeed, for example, is under house arrest after being put on an international list of terrorists. Lashkar-e-Toiba chief Commander Lakhvi is free as his trial still drags on in that country. The list is very long. We could go on and on with the names that we have.
May I give you the most important case?
Yes.
Osama bin Laden lived 7 years in Abbottabad, right next to the Pakistan Military Academy. He sired 3 children, 2 of whom were born in government hospitals. He took on an additional wife and lived with 5 children and 8 grandchildren and his son and daughter and so on. And the army knew nothing about it?
That's hard to believe, as you've put it yourself. And here is another case of a man who did not have adequate proof against him by the government's own admission, but was tried and convicted within 3 months. How does that work?
You know, listen, the army, as you said, functions under a chain of command. The officers, you will have one officer, at least from Indian court martials, there's one officer from the Judge Advocate General's branch who ensures that the legal procedures under the Army Act are followed. But here they're acting under powers granted to them which are not a part of their duties of the army. And I think, as I said, I narrated to you what Justice Fakhruddin Ibrahim told me about Bhutto's trial. They will be headed the same way on far more serious issues. But as far as we are concerned, we will take it and see what needs to be done.
Well, what can be done is also a question that I'm going to put to you in a bit. But while the human cost of the fraught relations between these 2 Asian nuclear powers has always been very high, Kulbhushan Jadhav is a textbook example of how all judicial norms and precedents are ignored for political expediency in Pakistan. According to existing rules, Jadhav's trial should have been transparent, held in a civil court. According to the Geneva Convention, as Smriti also pointed out, that guides relations between free states, a sovereign state cannot deny consular access to citizens of another state in captivity. And that brings me to the question, Taha, the parallels that we are drawing. On the one hand, there are terrorists against whom ample proof has been provided by India, by the US. Those cases are still dragging on. Some of them are being called humanitarian aid workers in Pakistan. On the other hand, this is a civilian, according to the government of India. Even if you say he is a spy, what is the proof? When was the trial held? What were the proceedings? And this man is sentenced to death. Is this some kind of a leverage?
Well, definitely we've seen that the way the military trials are carried out in the country, there seems to be more of a political reasoning behind it rather than a judicial process and sort of like punishing someone for those reasons. Even in the last 2 years that the military courts, which have constitutional cover from the parliament now, which is separate from this particular case because this has been tried under the Army Act, but the military courts and the constitutional amendment that happened in the last 2 years, we've seen sort of at times activists have called a bloodbath in Pakistan Pakistan, in the sense that a number of people have been hanged, and it's basically we have no idea who these people were, how they were arrested, what the crimes were narrated to us by the ISPR, say in the military media wing, saying that they did so and so, but what investigations went on was the police was not involved. So all of it behind closed doors, and the reason was it because there was a lot of hue and cry after the Peshawar school attack that happened and that killed 130 children. And after that, because of this all sort of public pressure and pressure from the civilian government, the military sort of said that, okay, we're going to be conducting these trials of these militants, but who these militants were, and despite that, we've seen that Pakistan has still continues to suffer with militancy. We've seen attacks happening, the good and the bad Taliban policy. And so because of that, this is sort of the bad Taliban, or people who are anti-state in the country, or this perception to say that we are working against people who are anti-state. That happens a lot more, and the military decides in these cases a lot more. And it's sort of a political messaging that it sends, whether domestically, whether to the civilian government or to the international powers.
Rima, I want to ask you this. We've touched upon international law. We want you to tell our viewers in detail what it specifically says about trying a civilian from another country in a sovereign, and have Pakistani military courts then become systemic tools of human rights abuse going by this case?
I'll only speak about human rights law. International human rights law is very clear, and in this case, there are two different provisions that seem to come into play. The first is the right to life. I mean, you can't, firstly, the ICJ and Amnesty International, and now an increasing number of states worldwide are opposed to the death penalty. And, even when the death penalty is given, it is absolutely essential that the fairest of trials with all guarantees of due process are at all times respected. In this case, the fact that Mr. Jadhav was given the death penalty is a huge problem because, as we've been speaking about in the last half an hour, the trial by no means looks fair and free. So that's a big problem. The second is the right to a fair trial and the right to liberty. Again, secret trials are by definition unfair trials. And a lot of people in the military and elsewhere, they say, you don't know what happened in the trial. How can you say it was unfair? The simple answer is that this is why, under international standards, trials have to be open. They have to be public. In a few cases, you're allowed to hold trials that are in camera, but you cannot have judgments that are secret. You can't have the military's media wing come out with a press statement with the charges, with the evidence, and say that the accused person just confessed to the charges. These confessions themselves raise other concerns. As Taha was pointing out, Pakistani military courts, in a different set of terrorism cases, there are 95% confession rates in those cases. I mean, that raises concerns about torture, about ill treatment, about duress, and especially when a person is held in secret detention, does not have access to family, to civilian lawyers, to human rights organizations, and in this particular case, to a consular access. These concerns are even more exaggerated. I mean, we don't know under what circumstances Mr. Jadhav confessed, and I say that in quotations because we don't know whether he willingly confessed to these crimes or not. So all these international norms, international standards this trial does seem to be incompatible with all of them: the right to life, the right to a fair trial, and the right to be protected from torture and other ill treatment. Even the Pakistani Supreme Court has said in a number of judgments where Pakistani civilians have been put on trial and they've apparently confessed to their crimes, that you need to have a number of safeguards in play. You can't hold someone in detention for many months or many weeks and then say that person confessed. The confession has to be recorded immediately after arrest. Under no circumstances is the person who is accused of a crime to be given back to the military or to the police in police remand after this confession, because of course the courts have said that they'll be fearful of their lives and their families' lives, and they might be under duress if they know they're going to be returned to the military or the police. So they have to be in judicial remand, in judicial custody. after their confessions. And all these safeguards have not been been respected in this case. So there are serious questions that arise, about fair trial, about the right to be free from torture and ill treatment, and more importantly, the right to life. I would like to point out, though, that Mr. Jadhav now has an opportunity to file an appeal before a military court of appeal, and there is then a possibility of a review before civilian courts like the High Courts and the Supreme Court, which anyone can file for him. And finally, there will be that opportunity to request for a pardon from the president. So there are a couple of other stages that this case
That's a very important point you've highlighted, because most people we've spoken to say that he doesn't have legal recourse.
I think that while I appreciate the points the young lady has made, the fact is that this has been endorsed by the army chief, General Bajwa, and there is nobody higher within the army than General Bajwa. So there is no further appeal. The other point of concern is, as you yourself noted, a large number of Pakistani civilians, largely Pashtuns, I understand, have been tried, found guilty and executed by military courts because of the constitutional amendment. All I feel is sorry is that as a parliamentary democracy, the parliament so easily bargained away its rights to the military. No other democracy have I seen this happen.
May I clarify the legal position?
Yes, Reema. Reema, please do.
So the first thing, and I think it's important not to conflate this with the terrorism trials that are going on under the 23rd Constitutional Amendment. This particular provision is under the Army Act, which allows, unlike the Indian Army Act, it allows military courts to try certain offences under the Official Secrets Act. So this is the jurisdiction that the military courts in this case are assuming. The second is absolutely, this is why I said that whether this appeal system is effective or not is a huge problem, because the Chief of Army Staff has to confirm every death sentence handed out by a military court. After he does that, then the accused, or in this case the convict, has the right to appeal to a military court of appeal. And at the same time, and this is what we've seen in other trials as well, that the military court of appeal has that say, but whether that's effective or impartial, all these questions remain, because like the gentleman also said, once the Chief of Army Staff has confirmed a sentence, who in the military, given that the military is, they have such a strict chain of command, and military officers who sit in these courts are subject to those, the military chain of command, who will overturn that decision now? So whether these appeals are effective or not, huge question, but that opportunity is there.
Just one little question, if you could, which I have. I have not known of any country where a person is sentenced to death under the Official Secrets Act. The worst you can give a guy under the Official Secrets Act is imprisonment. This is why I personally felt that this sort of power of a death sentence comes under the constitutional amendment, not perhaps under the Official Secrets Act.
The Official Secrets Act, Section 3, which relates to spying and espionage, it has the possibility of a death sentence. Death or imprisonment, or there's another bill.
Thank you.
Let me ask this to Taha just a second. Taha, what are you picking up? Does he have legal recourse at this point or not?
Basically, as is being mentioned, because it's under the Army Act, then within the military he has a right to appeal. But given whether or not it would be effective as being discussed, that has to be seen. Other than that, it will go to it's sort of in the Pakistani civilian, under their domain. Also, the presidency has to either sign the death warrant also, or give him a pardon. So he has that one step also on the civilian side. So there is one step at the military side and one step on the civilian side, but most mostly from what we're picking up right now within the military, I don't think there will be any sort of relief that he will get. And already we're on television and commentators here are talking about the civilian government's turn to act. In the sense that the civilian government should approve this and go ahead with it. So there's pressure on the civilian government that we can already see from different quarters and usually quarters that we know are backed by the military.
You wanted to make a point?
Right. I just wanted to, the commentators have been speaking about fair trial and death penalty. So there are two issues in this case. One is the fair trial, which we have spoken at length about. The second one is death penalty. The point is that death penalty should be abolished entirely. It does not matter who the accused is, what the crime is, whether he is innocent or guilty, or what the method of execution is. Now, Pakistan, well, incidentally, tomorrow, Amnesty International is coming out with a global report on death sentences and executions. And a research shows that Pakistan has executed over 400 people in the past 2 years, and last year the sentences, death sentences that they have given out are over 360 death sentences. It's one of the world's top 5 executioners. So this is something that we need to talk about. We need to see how freely, I mean, why death sentence is given at all, and why we are not discussing about death penalty to be completely abolished.
Right, that's a good point you made, and we're talking about building pressure. Taha was talking about that. Taha, earlier we were talking, Mr. Parthasarathy said that this might be the military's way of building pressure and of undercutting Nawaz Sharif's authority at a time when he's already dealing with the Panama crisis. Is that something that is also being talked about in Pakistan?
Well, there's definitely pressure on the civilian government right now with regards to the Panama, but I mean, whether or not this is linked to this particular case, that's yet to be seen. But we do know that in the past, the way the military has acted out and the way the military has tried to sort of sabotage a peace process between India and Pakistan, and the way we get to talk to military sources and in sort of informal conversations, they mention this dislike for the Nawaz Sharif peace overtures and the fact that when Modi came into power, or when Nawaz Sharif came into power earlier, the closeness they enjoyed in their initial period of sort of tenure, and that is not looked as a positive thing, because again, given the fact that the military is very Indian-centric and it defines the sort of relation that Pakistan should have with India, and it controls the foreign policy with regards to India or other regional players. So in all of that sense, definitely the Pakistan military has pressurized the civilian government and Nawaz Sharif's government, particularly in the last 3-4 years when it comes to India. And this particular case will also be used in that manner. Already when the arrest happened on 3rd March 2016, there was a lot of talk on TV and from political parties, and sort of this information was fed, or this narrative was fed in which it was talked about how the civilian government is not taking up the case of Kulbhushan Yadav internationally or talking about in the United Nations. And then, Sartaj Aziz had to come forward and clarify the position of the government. But then a lot of parliamentarians or a lot of political parties or commentators demanded the Prime Minister to address the issue, and he has not talked about it at all. So in that sense, there is already pressure with regards to this case and how the whole India-Pakistan relationship works out, and how the civilian sort of have lost space on that.
Right. In fact, the government of India today summoned Pakistan's High Commissioner Abdul Basit to protest the treatment of its citizen Kulbhushan Yadav, who Islamabad has convicted as a spy. In a strongly worded statement, while rubbishing charges of Kulbhushan Yadav being a spy, India has said that the trial by a military court was a sham. The verdict, quote-unquote, premeditated murder, and India has also promised to pursue this matter at the highest level. Let's listen into reactions from the government. Right, we'll just play out for you those sound bites that came from many others, including the Union Defence Minister and the Union Home Minister here in India. But Pakistan, meanwhile, has also accused India of fomenting trouble in Balochistan, and that's where Jadhav was allegedly operating. India has denied all these allegations, but experts believe that Jadhav's death sentence may be used by Pakistan as a bargaining chip to buttress the case of Indian interference in its troubled provinces. Let's play out those sound bites by some in the government of India before we take this discussion forward.
This is basically a crime that is being planned, a murder, and it's not something that we can possibly contemplate. Certainly, I'm hoping it is merely a sign of some sort of pressure they want to put, and that eventually the two governments can talk about the matter and come to an amicable conclusion. As far as India is concerned, if the Pakistanis carry through such an action, then absolutely it's a very grave matter that should call for the highest escalation on our part.
मुझे कोई आश्चर्य नहीं है, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान में कभी डेमोक्रेसी की चीज़ कभी थी नहीं वहाँ। वो तो जंगल राज पर ही पनप के आए हैं। उनका पूर्वज भी हमारे हिंदुस्तान के इतिहास में जितनी मारकाट उन्होंने की है, किसी ने नहीं की थी।
एक भारतीय को जब वे पकड़ते हैं तो वे रॉ एजेंट का पहले आरोप लगाते हैं, फिर उस पर केस झूठे चलाते हैं, उसके बाद ये उसको भारतीय होने की सजा देते हैं, न कि रॉ एजेंट होने की सजा देते हैं। वहां पर हुक्म दे दिया जाता है, आदेश दे दिया जाता है कि ये एक हिंदुस्तानी हमने पकड़ा है, इस पर हमने ये केस डाला, ये छूटना नहीं चाहिए, इसे सजाए मौत दी जानी चाहिए। वे 1 साल के बाद ही सर्वजीत को सजा सुना दी गई थी और 1 साल के बाद ही आज यादव को सुनाया। इसमें कोई हैरानी वाली बात नहीं है, क्योंकि हम इनसे उम्मीद यही कर सकते थे।
G. Parthasarthi, that's a sister who's saying that these people are being punished for being Indian, not for being spies, not for being raw agents or whatever else the Pakistanis have charged them of being. Having said that, we've seen the rhetoric. We've seen the démarche served on the High Commissioner. What more can the government of India do?
Well, as I said, we have sorted these things out in the past, but except that the trials were not conducted in this manner. In a real world, these things happen. People spy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Mr. Yadav was doing it or not doing it, but we have denied it. But the fact is that you ultimately sort it out diplomatically. But this time, I have never quite seen this form of assertiveness by the army over an elected civilian government. And as one of our Pakistani friends said, you have a weakened Nawaz Sharif because of the Panama trial now before the Supreme Court. And the military is taking full advantage of it. You had the de facto foreign minister of Pakistan, Sartaj Aziz, declare that in parliament that there was no evidence. So it is the army asserting itself. How far they carry it, we'll have to wait and see. If, as they say, there are further procedures and it requires confirmation by the president. But quite clearly there's an attempt not merely to, show they're acting tough, but they also use this as psychological pressure on India. And India is not going to buckle on this.
You know, we were just playing these images and graphics of the stark differences. Ajmal Kasab's trial went on for 4 years. He was caught on camera being involved in a terror attack.
He was caught with an AK-47?
AK-47, absolutely, in the city of Mumbai. Yaqub Mehman, the trial went on for 22 years before he was sentenced. Afzal Guru, 12-year-long trial. And here we have Kulbhushan Yadav, 3 months of trial, no proof. And this difference and the fact that there are the likes of Hafiz Saeed and others who are walking around, roaming around freely, does that shrink the room for regular diplomacy? Then how do you go back to the talking table?
I have always held, and I must tell you, I am unconventional. And I've been telling this to the government, and I have lived 5.5 years in Pakistan, dealt with them for almost 25. We've reached a stage where we will now have to make it clear that we will only talk army to army. The civilian government is incompetent, incapable of delivering. So, okay, let's talk to the military. Let's the DGMOs talk.
So the government of India talks to the military?
No, our military, the DGMOs talk, because the root cause of all this is the infiltration across the border. Let the intelligence agency, but to stop that. But right now in this atmosphere, there will be no question of a political level dialogue or anything of the sort, no.
So how does India then take this forward? How does India take this case forward?
I look at it this way.
For Mr. Jadhav's family.
Pakistan's problems are not only with us. If you read the Afghan newspapers, they are devastating.
Yeah.
So they are now caught in this two-front situation, and they'll have to find a way out. Now, if they don't give space to the civilian government and diplomacy, and the military runs the show, all I can say is they're going to get into more of a morass. So I don't think we need rushing to anything. We shouldn't be emotional. Make it very clear that the response will be at a time and place of our choosing, and in a manner of our choosing. Let the process play itself out. You know, the worst thing you can do, which I find in sections of the media here, is to get hysterical. No. Deal with it in a cool and collected manner. That's how mature countries behave.
Well, countries is something that I'm going to question, but mature countries when you say. Taha, what has been the reaction in Islamabad with the MEA saying that this is premeditated murder if Pakistan goes ahead with it?
Well, that statement hasn't really been resonated here. The local media hasn't really picked it up. We've seen that...
The government?
The government hasn't even responded to it. We've seen that the only statement that has come out is from the ambassador in Delhi, who has released a statement, and that statement has been run by the Pakistani media also, in which he has said that Kulbhushan Jadhav is whatever happened with him is what happens with somebody who's involved with terrorism, and he should be punished. So that's the only response that we've seen after India's protest, and that protest was registered with the Pakistani ambassador in Delhi also, and he responded in that manner then.
All right. Taha Siddiqui, Reema Umar, G. Parthasati, Priti Singh, thanks very much for joining us here on Gravitas. And we do hope that the governments can find a way to secure the release of Kulbhushan Jadhav. He is a civilian, as the government of India has been saying, not involved in any of those activities. We will, of course, be on top of this story and keep you updated on developments. We're taking a short break here on Gravitas. Be back with lots more.